Now, it's time for the Anchormen podcast with Matt Gaetz and Dan Ball.
Welcome back to Anchormen. It was last week. We had an epic show with my good friend Steve Bannon. So you're going to want to check that out. It was our most successful Anchorman to date. We went over politics and jail and how oddly the two go together. But tonight, I am joined by my on-again, off-again employee, my one and only Indian guru, Vish Burra. Vish was the founding producer of Steve Bannon's War Room. He was a member of my congressional staff and the congressional staff of George Santos, and now is a producer on the Matt Gaetz Show. So, Vish, we went mano a mano with Bannon last week, and as folks consult that episode, I thought maybe we could start out our conversation tonight kind of with your work for a guy who's one of the most influential yet mercurial figures on the political right. You were his producer, his driver. Give us some Steve Bannon stories.
You know, I loved my experience with Steve because I learned so much of the alternative tactics, or sort of these dark art tactics of how you deal with the media and how you influence and how you get not just stories out there, but how you get certain frames around stories out there. And one of the crystallized moments in my memories of working for Steve Bannon was when I was driving him once to New York during the COVID pandemic. I think it was around April. So this is one of the first times we're even getting out of the house to go somewhere that wasn't, the Washington, D.C. barracks or the War Room. And I remember he was on the phone. He was taking phone calls the whole ride up to New York, and it was a lot of phone calls with the media. Now, some of the people he was talking to were conservative reporters, and some of them that he was talking to were liberal reporters. But what was fascinating and what I learned that day was how to make sure that on both sides of the story, you're the center player in it. And it actually doesn't, and the way he pitched it to them was he would get on the phone with the conservative reporters, and he would, kind of describe what's going on and explain himself or frame himself as the hero in the story to the conservative reporters. Then, when he would go and get the liberal reporters on the phone, he would serve up the same story again, but he would portray himself as the villain, right? As the guy who's stopping something, or the guy who's, thwarting the liberals' plans on this by helping the conservatives with X, Y, and Z. And what I understood then is that what he was giving both sides what they wanted at the end of the day to run the story. The conservatives needed Steve Bannon as the hero in their story, and the liberals needed Steve Bannon as the villain in their story to run it. And therefore, he would play these narratives off each other, and at the end, in both stories, he comes out as the center player. And I thought, wow, that is just a fascinating technique on how to make sure that on both sides you're being covered. And for him, the frame didn't matter. He knows the liberals need a villain for their story, so he's happy to play it for them.
Well, and when we think about the great stories of humanity, don't we remember the villains as much as we remember the heroes? Like in Peter Pan, who's the better character, Peter Pan or Captain Hook?
Oh, it's got to be Captain
Hook.
Hook.
You remember the Lex Luthor energy as much. You
know?
All the great Batman villains. The Joker is definitely more famous than Batman.
Right.
And so is there a part of that is part of Bannonism, that it's okay to be the villain or the anti-hero so long as you're in the story?
Oh, absolutely. It's not just that, but I think that kind of mentality has evolved even really after the Batman, the Dark Knight movie, where Joker, Heath Ledger had this historical performance, and then the Avengers movie where Thanos, Infinity War, Thanos becomes this revered villain. And I think that the American public has had more of an appetite for these anti-hero types.
The Sopranos.
Yeah, and The Sopranos, even
Breaking Bad.
Yes, we've had I think more of an appetite.
Are we
because
in the golden age of the anti-hero?
Well, I think it's
Is Donald Trump one?
Well, I think it's actually the inverse of that. It's because so many of our heroes or our perceived heroes have disappointed us. And so now I think that there is an appetite for Americans to want to identify with an anti-hero who gets things done, even if he's perceived as the bad guy. For them, it doesn't matter because he does what he believes in something and he gets it done any way possible. And that's kind of the role that I see Steve Bannon playing. But not only that, playing that up and serving it to an audience who may never ever give him the benefit of the doubt of being the hero, right? And so he says, you know what? In your story, no matter what I say, I will be a villain. So I'm just going to play that up to make sure that that's the story that gets through.
I have seen members of Congress attempt this strategy, and they believe that they can kind of romance the stone with the media, that they can charm the Daily Beast or the Washington Post or the New York Times. And most of them can't. They don't have the ability that a Bannon does, or frankly, a Trump does. I mean, remember, Trump was this charismatic, charming figure to the media all the way up until he became president of the United States. And, I didn't like talking to the leftist reporters. My staff would always say, "Oh, Matt, if you talk to them, they hear your perspective. Even if it's a bad story, you'll at least get your voice in it." And I took in my heart, my approach was, all these people are going to do is try to make the work we're doing look bad. And so why lend credibility to the reporting by lending your voice to it? That's not a Bannon perspective.
No, hell no. In fact, again, the mentality is, I know that I will never be a hero in your story, and you're going to write the story. So you know what? Let me go in there, lend voice to it by standing up for what I believe in. And if I have to even sound, because what they really want is that soundbite, right? That soundbite or that voice, that quote that they can go and run and say, look at this bad guy, right? My theory on that, learning from Bannon, is give it to them. Give it to them, because there's nothing you can say to make them to make them see you as the hero. So definitely make sure they remember you as the villain, the bad guy, the one to fear, right? Because that actually has way more of a psychological effect in their future actions against you, right? I think that is the theory of the case, and I actually think it works. And I kind of have relationships with liberal reporters in the same way.
You love a little bit of liberal interaction. Actually, go to a little Vishbura Jordan Klepper.
What are you going to miss out on if this mandate prevents you from doing it?
I just tried to get some Thai. I love Thai food. I just tried to get some Thai food around the corner. They told me I couldn't sit down and eat unless, I had a vaccine mandate. Now, I believe things like that were said to Martin Luther King when he tried to walk into places to eat, but they said they had a different reason to make him a second-class citizen.
Comparing yourself to MLK are big words for a guy wearing 80s b-boy jeans.
Actually, these are not 80s b-boys jeans. They are new true religions. I know you can't tell because you're a Democrat and you can't afford these things.
All right, well, enjoy. I hope you don't get sick.
Thank you. I still haven't yet. Have you gotten COVID?
I did.
Ha, that sucks. Too bad for you.
That's the empathy that the young Republicans bring. Thank you.
So that was an interesting opportunity. You had to face down Comedy Central's best.
Yeah, and that is a great example, actually, of that mentality, because Jordan Klepper is there trying to villainize me about not taking the COVID vaccine, right? Because I'll get sick and I'll get all these other people sick.
Doesn't it look ridiculous today?
Yeah, well, it's not just
panicans.
Well, it's not just that, but the reason why that clip went viral is because at the end of the very clip, he says, "I hope you don't get sick," and I say, "Well, I still haven't gotten COVID yet to this day, even though I haven't taken the COVID vaccine. Have you, a person who has taken the COVID vaccine?" And he says, "Yeah, I have actually gotten COVID." And I'm like, "Oh, well, sucks, too bad for you." And then he accuses me of not being empathetic. The guy was making fun of my genes, right? And my aptitude in understanding the founding fathers. And then he says, "Oh, you don't have sympathy for me because I got sick with COVID." Meanwhile, I'm telling this guy, "Hey, I didn't take the vaccine and I still haven't gotten sick. Maybe there's something wrong with your case." But he's not going to want to hear that. He just wants his soundbite. And you know what? I just want my soundbite. And so I gave it to him. And I think that exchange is one of the ones that put me on the map. In terms
You're
of
on the map?
A little bit. Yeah, I have a little spot, a little flag for Vishbura carved
All right,
out.
so we were cutting it up earlier today on one of the big issues shaping the debate on Capitol Hill over this reconciliation bill. And it's the Medicaid program. And there are three major drivers of the federal budget. You've got Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. And Republicans and Democrats are in pretty universal agreement that Social Security and Medicare are benefits that people have earned, that they've paid into, and that they ought to receive because it helps a lot of elderly folks and folks that can't go out and generate disposable income. Medicaid is where I would do the cutting. And really, you have to understand in Washington, D.C., a cut doesn't actually mean less money. Okay, when we say cut, only in Washington speak, a cut is a reduction in expected future outlays.
Right.
So if you're spending X dollars today, and the expectation is you're going to spend 100 times X 10 years from now, if you only spend 50 times X 10 years from now, they view that as a cut.
Right.
Which is absurd. So no one's actually talking about cutting Medicaid. They're talking about reducing the expenditures in the future growth of the program. And I'll lay out some of my critiques of Medicaid. I believe that states aren't given the opportunity to design their own Medicaid systems because the federal government requires you to meet certain requirements in order to get the drawdown. The way Obamacare dumped a lot of able-bodied people into Medicaid, that was Obamacare. You had to be, single mom, below the poverty line, or indexed there too in some way. The disabled, people who are physically disabled and disabled otherwise, get Medicaid benefits. But now, under Obamacare, we've put able-bodied adults into this program. And those able-bodied adults are now crowding out a system that was intended for the vulnerable. And so the big fight is whether or not to have a work requirement on Medicaid and whether or not really to send a lot of the Medicaid program to the states. You have posited the theory that the Republican messaging that we're about to hear from Eric Burleson is bad. First, we'll go to Burleson and then get Vish's reaction.
The people that truly need Medicaid, we're focused on making sure that program, if anything, is lifted up and made sound for the people that are the vulnerable population, the aged, the blind, the disabled. To make sure that it's available for them, we've got to get, frankly, I call them the deadbeats, the people that are the young, able-bodied, working-age adults that should be out there working and contributing, but for whatever reason are not.
All right, he says they're deadbeats. What say you?
This is the most politically tone-deaf messaging that I have heard, especially coming off the heels of Donald Trump's historic 2024 victory, mainly fueled by young men, right? We worked all of 2023 and 2024 to get young men to come vote for us, and the first people we decide to attack when we need to go and cut Medicaid is we're going to go and attack young men for being on Medicaid? Right?
Do you think that the reason young men voted for Donald Trump was so that they could get Medicaid without having to go to work?
No, not at all. But I don't think that they signed up to be on the receiving end of being villainized as the people that need to be gotten off of Medicaid. Now, I'm not saying that...
Can you say that people need to be gotten off of Medicaid without villainizing them? Because I'm not villainizing them. I'm just saying I don't want to pay for your health care. Well, there are a lot of people who aren't villains who I don't want to pay for their health care.
Well, I think that then if that's the case, then why is it that young men are singled out? I would say why...
They aren't. By the way, why are you genderizing this? Young women are treated the same way.
Well, no, actually, no, because if you go and watch those clips of all these members talking about it, they say, oh, no, Medicaid is meant for single mothers, and they play the compassion card on single mothers.
It doesn't treat single mothers differently. This bill doesn't treat single mothers differently than it treats single men. Now, you may critique the messaging, but in the actual bill... my sense is it was all able-bodied. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but it's is there a reason why able-bodied people shouldn't have to meet a work requirement? And the work requirements are so soft, Vish. The work requirements are 20 hours a week. When you worked for Steve Bannon, you could have met the work requirement in a day.
Okay. Yeah,
for a month.
But by the way, I get that. But I believe the number is something like 65% of people on Medicaid are working either part-time or full-time.
Sure. Well,
right?
I will concede, the numbers I pulled, about 12% of the Medicaid population is in this basket we're talking about, right? It could be 16. There's kind of some floating numbers depending on where you index the year. But why in the world shouldn't you view that as an enormous repository for savings?
Because there are other pots I think that we can go after to make savings. Namely, how many illegal aliens are on Medicaid? Right?
They meet the work requirement.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. You're telling me that
they should be thrown off. I agree.
But why isn't the messaging starting there?
Well, I think in a lot of ways it has.
I don't think so.
But
because
the Democrats haven't attacked for that. You see, man, maybe that's a smart tactical play on the Democrats' part. But Republicans have put downward pressure on the ability of states to sign up, every illegal alien that just jumped the border. Where they're being attacked is on the Medicaid expansion population under Obamacare. But you're saying that those people ought to receive that. I know
it's not that I think that they ought to receive it. I just think that this is politically tone deaf to attack them for it. I don't want able-bodied men on Medicaid. I don't want able-bodied women on Medicaid. Okay, but the question we should be asking is, why are those people on Medicaid in the first place? And if I don't see,
probably because give it to them.
Well, there's that, but also underemployment, right? And now and issues like that. If we're not cutting H-1B visas in this same bill, if we're not cutting all the things or codifying President Trump's reindustrialization executive orders and stuff like this, if you're not codifying that, but your main concern is booting the able-bodied men on the bill to go because they're being lazy playing Xbox in their mom's basement,
which plenty are, by the way.
Well, and you know what?
Have you met Zoomers?
By the way, I'd love to see a demographic outlay on that. You know what I mean? But I think that this is
demographic outlay. Which
I think that there is a lot of non-white Americans who are actually fitting that criteria, and instead they're just lumping every young man in America into this this bucket, and I think that's also wrong.
Well, you're making an argument about politics. Let me posit this: I was once a young man, and so I have experience with this. I'm somewhat of an expert. When you're a young man, you don't think about your healthcare coverage. There's not a wide swath of men under the age of 35 that when they walked into the voting booth made a choice based on what they thought would be better for their health insurance coverage. Maybe they voted based on what they thought was better for their physical health, but not like the insurance coverage payment for it. So I don't think your argument lands because I don't think that the political impact of it is felt, even if you feel attacked.
No, it's not that I feel. I'm not on Medicaid, but I'm a working guy.
You know who's on Medicaid?
Who?
38% of Californians.
That's wild. That is wild.
38% of Californians are on Medicaid.
Does that discriminate against legal and illegal?
That's all. That's the whole kit and caboodle. What it does is it crowds out the Medicaid program for people who really need it. And I am not against Medicaid. I don't believe we should eliminate Medicaid. I actually think we should make it stronger. But you don't make Medicaid stronger by taking people who have paid taxes in America, lived in America their whole lives, and put them behind the newest arrivals to our country.
I agree.
Yeah, we're in agreement on that. There is some tension in what we're saying and what I was saying earlier about sending it all to the states. Because let's break this down. I actually would just block grant the program, send it to the states, and pretty much let them do what they want. I am that much of a federalist. Now, in places like California, they're still going to sign up the illegals.
Right.
They're still going to pay for the transsexual surgeries on Medicaid. They're still going to do all that weird stuff. In other states, they won't make those mistakes. And I actually think that's okay in federalism. I think that you do need to show success and failure so that the success can be appreciated, modeled, nurtured, and developed. So if you were like Emperor for a Day on this Medicaid program, would you block grant it without strings, or would you make it the conservative fever dream of, no transsexual surgeries, no funding for the illegal aliens, none of this, abortion tourism that is flourishing?
Oh yeah, no, I would put a ton of strings on it in that way with the block grants, right? I'm federalist, yeah.
Then it's a categorical grant. It's not a block grant. People like block grants and then do this. The definition of a block grant is you give them the block of money and then leave them alone. what you're describing as a categorical grant.
Oh yeah, well, okay, then that's what it is, right? I would put a ton of strings on it because look at what we're tangentially related is the SALT deductions on that too. Like when you have states going buck wild in terms of spending, collections, and then the federal government is subsidizing this, and you have red staters with responsible policies subsidizing some of this stuff too if those SALT deductions are in place or the caps are raised or whatever. Like eventually these blue states are going to run back to the Fed and ask guys like you from Florida to subsidize it again or pay for it again or bail them out, right? And so I don't believe that these states are ever going to be responsible with it. That's why I would rather do categorical grants.
If you've just tuned in and have heard Vish Burra talk about SALT deductions, he's not giving you the latest advice he got from his cardiologist. This is actually a policy issue that is being resolved in the reconciliation legislation. It stands for state and local taxes. And in blue states like Illinois and California and New York, people are able to deduct those taxes from their federal income taxes. Now, the reason Floridians like myself find that unfair is that we didn't choose to elect people to charge those taxes. We view an income tax at the state level commensurate with a violation of the Geneva Convention in the state of Florida.
Yeah.
And so we don't think that's fair. Now, New Yorkers and Californians would say we are not like on par recipient states. We're donor states to other places that have other larger that have other infrastructure needs and other federal government workforce needs. So I don't know, man. I think that the way they've resolved this with Elise Stefanik getting in there and creating this $40,000 cap for people earning under $500,000, I don't love it. I think that it is probably less fair to Floridians than the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that President Trump previously passed. But if it leaves everybody a little uncomfortable and cobbles together the votes, are you good with that as a landing?
You know what? 40,000, I'm not against that, right? But you go and talk to those New Yorkers, that 40,000 isn't enough, right?
Well, to us, it's too much. Maybe that's why it's the feature of a good deal.
Well, and I hope so, right? But they're still upset about that number, and it's not really about income taxes. It's really about property taxes, right? What they're trying to do is they're trying to alleviate or provide relief to the rich members in their districts, right, that have over $100,000 in property tax bills.
Right. It isn't poor people.
Right. No.
In these districts.
My middle class constituents, right? Like, Rep. Lawler, they're not middle class, right? 40,000 will do just fine for a middle class person who owns a home in New York, but it will not do well for his Westchester district or for George Santos's New York 3, right? The Gold Coast, where those people are banging down the doors on SALT, or anybody on Long Island for that matter. It's about the property taxes. And that is really where that's where these people get the gall to say we need, an 10 times raise on the SALT cap from 10K to 100K, because those multi-million-dollar homes are the ones with the over 100K tax bills.
Bingo. The third big issue that everyone's fighting over is the repeal of the Green New Deal tax credits. And there are voices on the Republican side looking at some of the features of the Green New Deal and saying, well, we don't totally hate this part or that part. And, I think that is really at odds with how pretty much every Republican campaigned. I don't remember a single Republican campaigning on this stuff, and yet it's causing a little hiccup. Like, percentage-wise, how much of the Green New Deal has to be repealed before you consider that a frontline positive effect of the big, beautiful bill?
100%. Right? The Green New Deal is not only is it a total scam, but the whole campaign leading up to us getting the White House and the majority in the House and the Senate was drill, baby, drill, energy independence. And it was all about energy, right? And now you're talking about recodifying or keeping in the provisions
forever, by the way.
Forever of
they
this.
will never be repealed if they are repealed now.
Right. So this is just another farce from the House, and I'm really upset that that we have another example coming up of Republicans campaigning on one thing and doing a totally different thing, especially on the Green New Scam, you know. And for the last 4 years, we've heard every single line and derogatory term thrown at this Green New Deal thing and associating it with AOC and Bernie Sanders and all these people. And now, once they have the power, they're like, you know what? Actually, some parts of this is not terrible. This is a redux of 2016, the healthcare.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's got very like Obamacare energy to it.
Yeah. That's why. And again, and if this passes, I mean, look, come 2026, those midterms, if we lose the majority, I mean, we could just look right back at this and we'll know exactly what happened.
Well, this is what we're running on, one way or the other. So if we lose the majority, it's because this bill had too many losses and not enough wins. And you know, likewise, if we retain the majority, it'll probably be based on some of the things that are in this bill that we like the tax cuts, the opportunities for small businesses on depreciating their assets, and certainly on the lower rates that Americans have.
That's all we've got.
Well, there's border stuff in there, but people aren't as enthusiastic about that because they've seen how effective Trump was at sealing the border just through the sheer will of executive power.
Well, I also think that yes, the border stuff is in there, and I think that we as Republicans, conservatives, the base out there expects that at the least, right? And so, like, yeah, of course, I hope there's border stuff in there. Everyone made this the number one issue, right? But the tax cuts, I think, are going to be really, really important to deliver if we want a chance at the majority at all, because I think that fiscal conservatives, we want to see tax cuts, paired with spending cuts. But I actually think we're in a period right now where conservatives don't care about the spending cuts part. We just need relief immediately, even if that means the deficit's going up and all that. Listen, we're at $30-40 trillion of debt with all sorts of people getting freebies. At least a little patronage to the people who've worked and voted for President Trump can get some relief with tax cuts.
I get that that's the argument. I hate it because we also made the argument throughout this entire campaign that the debt and the deficits that were piling up each and every year contributed to inflation.
Of course.
Inflation was just as much a part of this campaign as the border or taxes. And when you make the argument that deficits and debt drive inflation, and then you don't really attack deficits and debt.
Well, Matt, where's the appetite? Look, how many of the Doge cuts are we codifying, right? How much? So our voters are not dumb. They're paying attention to all this stuff. And they're like, you know what? If the Doge cuts aren't happening or being codified, just please give me the tax cut relief. We
have a lot of the fiscal hawks on our network, on our show, and I don't think they were gaslighting us because they were actually fighting for the cuts.
Yeah.
But they would come on night after night and say, we want $1 trillion in cuts. We want $2 trillion in cuts. And now we're going to end up with what? $100 billion maybe?
Drop in the bucket. It's like that's what I'm saying. It's just $100 billion. We get it. You're not going to get the spending cuts. We know, but I think I've said this to you years ago when I said, listen, the paradigm on the American public there, it used to be socially liberal, fiscally conservative, and now it's flipping over to socially conservative in the sense that, like, don't chop my kids' genitals off. But
it's amazing that's what social conservatism is sort of retreated to.
Right, and then fiscally liberal, meaning that, okay,
keep giving me my Medicaid.
Yeah, keep giving me some Medicaid. You know what? The deficits, the spending is not terrible as long as I get relief, as long as there's patronage provided to me for voting for you.
Don't you think that the way Biden drove up these deficits so quickly with these massive spending bills, that people connected that to the higher prices that they were seeing at the grocery store?
Of course they did.
And don't you think they'll punish us if we spend this much and the inflation doesn't go down?
Matt, Biden flooded the zone with 10 million illegals. We can barely get 200 of them out without a massive fight. You don't think the American public also sees this? We get it. The system is against us, and it's always been against us. There's no due process to dump 10 million illegals in your country, but it's all the due process to get even 200 of them out.
Yeah, we're gonna wave them in by the plane load, bus load, raft load, and then demand a trial for each one of them. You know, Atticus Finch shows up and defends every illegal alien on the way out. It's completely unsustainable.
Right.
And if we accept that, we won't get the benefit out of it. Final note here on the Medicaid program. 2024, the Medicaid program cost the country $500 billion. In 2034, it'll cost $1 trillion. You know, you go 20 more years out, probably at $2 trillion. Go out. We are not going to be able to spend this amount of money. Now, I really sincerely don't think that means we have to reshape coverage for people who actually need Medicaid. I think we can actually make that a lot stronger, but we won't do that out of Washington. I've got to rid you of this notion that, you know, we put all the strings on, because that becomes infinitely regressive. We put strings on the program. They put the next thing you know, if you want Medicaid, you got to have your pronouns in your email box. And so it's better to just let the states do it. And you know what? My state will continue to crush it, and your state will continue to fail.
Which one, New York or California?
Yeah, either one. Folks, there's some real momentum in the fight for affordable health care. The president just signed a powerful executive order to drive down prescription drug prices across the board. But here's the thing. While the bureaucracy drags its feet, one pharmacy isn't waiting around. All Family Pharmacy is stepping up right now with real action to support the president's vision and give Americans more control over their health care. From now through the end of June, they're running a sale. Get 20% off site-wide, and here's what I love. You don't need insurance. They connect you right with licensed doctors in all 50 states, and they ship medicine right to your door fast. Whether you're looking for ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, antibiotics, emergency kits, vitamins, or just your daily meds, it's time to stock up and save. If you believe in being prepared, you believe in medical freedom, this is your pharmacy. Head over to allfamilypharmacy.com/Matt. Use promo code MATT20 for 20% off your order. That's allfamilypharmacy.com/Matt. MATT20 is the code. Let's push back on Big Pharma and make America healthy again. So, Vish, you have noticed this new trend in microlending, and it is leading to quite the economic catastrophe. Let everybody in on it.
Yeah, so Klarna, this company that provides this buy now, pay later service. It's very similar to Affirm and all these micro loan services where you're able to, you know, get a loan on like a PS5 that you get from Amazon, or even your McDonald's order off of Uber Eats, right? You can
get my burger on layaway.
You can get any of these things. Your Chipotle,
it's not even on layaway.
Right?
Buy now, pay later on your Chipotle.
You're right. And so now this platform Klarna has grown to 100 million users, but now they're 100
million globally or in the United States?
It's globally.
Okay.
It's globally 100 million users, but nonetheless, how many of those people you think live in America? Probably a ton, right? And so now this company is reporting system-wide losses on this stuff, that defaults and delinquencies on these micro loans are going through the roof.
Well, yeah.
Right now.
Did anyone expect like, you know, Eddie to pay for the burrito that he got on a loan 5 weeks ago?
First of all, your whole business model is built on the idea of providing a loan to a guy who cannot pay for his Big Mac right now. Right? And you're supposed to collect from this guy in the future. Now, we can...
I just think economic Darwinism demands this business fail, right?
Well, I mean, yes, the economic Darwinism does, right? It's just like, oh, obviously, this is such a dumb idea. Like, why would you do it? But you know what? I've gotten to thinking about it. And, you know, if the big banks during the 2008 global financial crisis, if they were all able to get bailed out, right? And we say, well, the banks are too big to fail. Then you know what? My belly is too big to fail on this one. I want my micro loan for the burrito. I want my subprime, sushi loan immediately, right? Like
a floating loan on Outback. If interest rates go up, you had to pay more for the blooming
exactly.
onion.
I'll come back when I'm here on my next date, and maybe I'll pay him back.
How would that? Does at the point of sale? Like, is there anything where a date would know if you had to borrow the money for like the Ruby Tuesdays?
Well, there isn't, obviously, at like, if you go to a restaurant or something like that. No, I don't think that option is available.
Yeah.
But anytime you go to checkout, there's the Apple Pay option, credit card option, or the Klarna or Affirm option, right? And so that's how these things operate.
Ladies, if your man's picking the Klarna option, at checkout. You need to be watching. Okay.
Yeah, no, seriously, and that's a
But okay.
But also this is like The Big Short too, but like the straight to DVD version, right? But it's a signal that when those delinquencies and defaults go at that rate, especially at that level, the subprime level like that, it's a sign that we're hitting recession, right? And so
Or it was just a dumb business idea to make these loans.
Yeah, I mean, there's both, but I certainly wouldn't dismiss it. I think that first of all, for a country to have that many people in a position where they're taking out loans for like, a bowl of ramen, I think that is, again, catch the signal, not the noise,
What is it? Let's dissect what this is a bigger symptom of. When I was younger, I got into debt, but it was because people kept mailing me credit cards. And so I would use them.
Right.
And that became such a tortured story for an entire generation that ended up like barely being able to pay the minimum monthly payment as debt balances continued to rise. And is this type of a decentralized finance system a response to the failure of the big credit card companies and the big banks? And there's even a middle layer of that. Like if you go to a lot of clothing stores, right? They've got their branded credit card that they want to give you an incentive to get that you can use at Abercrombie or wherever. And it's kind of like their own vertically integrated Klarn, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so this is just the progression, in my mind, from the institutionalized banks and credit card systems to the kind of retail point of sale vertically integrated finance model to a totally decentralized finance model. But someone has to pay at some point,
right?
And that's what's not happening now. And is there like less of a recalcitrance to just acquiring debt now? And what does that say about us?
Well, here's the thing. I think from the company perspective, offering this credit, whether it's the store branded credit card, right? I think why you're seeing that so much and the expansion of this is because the profit margins on selling product is so low that instead the financial services division
that's such a good point.
of the same company through the interest actually makes them more money for the bottom line of the company than the actual profit from the sale on the product.
This is exactly what happened in the auto industry. Like the auto industry used to be driven by, did you have some swashbuckling fraternity president car salesman who could, get a little extra dollar out of somebody who was going to get the family Volkswagen.
Right.
But then when internet pricing created so much transparency that it really became commoditized, it was the finance instrument that ended up being lashed to the automobile that ended up generating a lot of value for the dealerships and the manufacturers.
Yeah, that is ultimately what the profit center for all these companies are. It's not Ford Motor Company that makes a ton of money. It's Ford Financial Services that provides the loan to buy the car that makes these companies the profits and the beefing up of the bottom line that they need for their investors and
we also
and shareholders.
Seem to be in an era of moral hazard financially right now. And you talked about the bailouts for the Wall Street banks. I think that contributed to it. I think that recently when we saw Silicon Valley Bank get bailout, that contributed to some moral hazard. And if on the decentralized finance loans, there is some alleviation of responsibility, like we saw in student loans, right? Like we are in an era where more and more and more there's moral hazard injected because people aren't having to deal with the consequences of their economic choices.
Yeah.
And it's not compassionate to build that moral hazard into a society. Like Joe Biden thought he was like being really, I guess, kind to all of the Etsy owners who had their businesses running through Silicon Valley Bank. But at the end of the day, banking is an enterprise that requires risk. And if you drain the risk out of that by saying the federal government is just backing the worst decisions people make, then you change it in a way that allows poor choices without having to feel the consequences of those choices. It would be like taking pain away from the human body. We'd all be pretty banged up and bruised up if when we ran into something sharp, our body didn't say, ouch, don't do that anymore.
Right. Well, the thing is that I think this is also a consequence of the fact that we've socialized the risk, especially for so many of these big companies, the big banks, right? It seems everybody is allowed to get free money except for the little guy, right? Like that's the way the feeling is. And it's like, well, you know what? If I can beat somebody on a college loan, I'll do it, right? Then I'll just go at. I'll
default on my burrito payment.
Right. I'll perform the sin and then ask for forgiveness later, right? And so because God forgives everybody, right? It's that same sort of similar mentality where a lot of people are saying, you know what? I'll take the burrito loan, right? I'll never pay it back, and who knows who's going to be on the hook for it at the end of the day, but somebody will forgive it, hopefully, because look, everyone's getting free money. The rich people are getting free money. All the risk is socialized. Why can't I be part of the pool that has their risk socialized too?
Well, I guess we'll find out.
You know,
because I don't think people are going to be repaying these loans to Klarna.
Oh, hell no, they're not going to be repaying.
It either gets socialized or it's the economic Darwinism. Democrats are freaking out at the way we won this last election. And I think we won it through these alternate media channels, the podcasting, the dominance on socials. We meme better than the left, like way better than the left.
Of course.
But we had to do that because we didn't control mainstream media.
Yeah.
They had such a control over mainstream media. Like we had to become like the jungle fighting force that found these other ways to build organizations. Now we've got this big story coming out about Democrat mega donors investing gajillions of dollars into an influencer army as like some sort of Squid Game that they hope a left-wing Joe Rogan arises out of. What say you, Vishpara?
Well, right now, these Democrat mega donors are fielding a ton of pitches, right? Everyone's saying, I got the next idea for the liberal Joe Rogan. I got the next idea to create the infrastructure.
By the way, I would love to be a fly on the wall in those pitches. Like, can you imagine the left-wing activists walking in and being like, so I've got the next new idea, a podcast with no gender.
Well, and you know what? Well, the first thing that should be said in those meetings is, you guys had a liberal Joe Rogan. His name was Joe Rogan, right?
Joe Rogan endorsed Bernie Sanders for president.
Exactly. So ridiculous. What the question is, how did we scare Joe Rogan away? And it's because, right, that's actually the problem that they're trying that they actually should be solving.
Yeah, rather than finding the next Joe Rogan, they should realize why they lost the last one.
Right. And you know what? And a lot of Democrats are smart to this, but obviously the mega donors and the donors, it's so crazy how the donors are like the last to find out about like what's really going on too. That's how they get scammed out of so much money, right? in the first place. But they're going to these donors saying, yeah, we could find the next Rogan or whatever. Now, two things. Point one, this is going to fail. And the reason this is going to fail is because Democrats, I don't care if it's a politician, non-politician type, whatever, they are so scared and walk on eggshells to say anything, right? And the whole point of why these guys, especially your Aiden Rosses, Tim Dillons of the world, Joe Rogans, is because they're willing to explore the edgy, right? And they're willing to have conversations about things that not everyday people talk about, and you know, perhaps entertain a uncouth idea, or, you know, talk about it honestly in a way with authenticity. The lack of authenticity on the left and the lack of wanting to foster authenticity, right? Allowing someone to have a bad opinion or a wrong opinion in the first place without being canceled, right? That is what stops them from being...
Oh, so you think it's structural? You
Yes.
don't think this is just the talent hasn't gone that way, or they've run off the talent? You think that the nature of the social contract on the political left right now does not provide the oxygen for the type of creativity and boundary pushing that brings in people who
No way. And remember, the audience...
They couldn't even keep their Chanka. What's that guy, the young Turk guy's name?
Oh, Cenk. Couldn't he? Because he said something.
He could have been their next Rogan. He could have been their next Rogan.
Or Anna Kasparian, like, you know, saying, I don't want to hear about Kamala Harris running for president or running for governor of California in 2026, right? I don't want to hear that. They go and try, you know, cancel her for that, right? And so it is a structural, like you said, it is a structural problem that their ideology and their the way that they signal to each other social status is the very thing that keeps them from finding that Joe Rogan. Because remember, why did we go on all those podcasts in 2024? To reach young men.
Yeah, we didn't just go on them; we built them.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing too, right? We built them. We built them out of basements.
Yeah, when
right?
we started, I mean, you and I have been involved in the building of a number of podcast projects that have been very successful. But when this all began, I never really believed that it was going to be like a needle to the veins of young men.
Right.
Like, I didn't think, you know what men under the age of 35 are really looking to do? Sit around and listen to the two of us yak it up for an hour.
Right.
But actually, like, why is that's so attractive? Is it because of the boundary pushing?
Yeah, it is because of the boundary. It's the willing to explore the unexplored, right? The manliest thing you could do is go into a dark hole and come out the other side.
This is not that kind of show.
I mean it in the Jordan Peterson way of like walking into the dark
like
cavern.
The conquistador,
Yes.
the whole notion of conquest.
Right, right. So they're going into the unknown and then making sense or bringing order to the unknown, right? That is the most manly sentiment or instinct that a man can have.
But if that's true, you have to keep going.
Yes, of
Because
course.
this becomes too known, right?
Well, yeah.
And we've been told that in the coming years, it's going to be the great time of acquisition of these podcast properties. That companies like Discovery and News Corp, pick your favorite media conglomerate, that rather than paying like the massive salary to Rachel Maddow, that it's going to be the acquisition of podcast networks that's going to drive programming.
And by the way, that's totally right. And you've already seen this paradigm has existed in the culture space or the art space for a long time. There was a difference. I like to use the analogy of the rap game or the hip hop industry, right? It was all like everyone who was cool listened to the underground rapper, right? The guy who's not famous yet. That's the one everyone's like, oh, you're not up on this guy? That's what's really cool is listening to.
Happening in podcasts?
Then now they go mainstream, right? And so because that guy got popular, that underground guy got popular, and the big companies realize that everyone's listening to that guy, they go and sign the deal with that guy. And then that guy goes mainstream. And then, now you get all the bells and whistles of being in the mainstream and the big check. And maybe you drop one great hit or one great album with that new deal, but then everything else kind of falls off after, right? And why is that? It's because you don't have the drive, right? For just these podcasts that we built out of the ground, we didn't start that by making pitch decks to multi-million-dollar mega donors.
No.
We just did it with like a 15 grand budget.
You could afford a microphone and a lens.
You're right. That's the underground aspect of it. And then we start rapping on that. And then people are listening. Oh man, this is the good stuff. This is where the real information is. These are the guys who are talking about all the things that the mainstream people won't talk about. But once everyone starts listening to that and the big guys understand that, then that's when they come with the offer that you can't refuse.
We've only got a couple minutes left, but since you mentioned rap culture, does Diddy get convicted?
You know what? I don't think so.
Oh, hot take.
Yeah, no.
Make the case for Diddy's innocence, Vish Burra, or at least his your belief that he would not be found guilty.
You know what? From the coverage that I've seen of this, Diddy's lawyers are doing a fantastic job. By the way, this is a redux of like late 90s, early 2000s Diddy, where he's got a top-notch legal team and PR team on this. And
the other side's got a Comey.
I mean, sure, they got a Comey, but right now, apparently...
He's got a Garagos.
But he doesn't know what 8647 means, right? That's where we are with the Comey side right now. We got people playing dumb, right? And so that's not Diddy's team. Diddy's team is going up, slicing and dicing, and the main... Cassie being the main witness there, they got her admitting that she was she had claimed that he raped her or sexually assaulted her, but then was hanging out with him and having sex with him after that this incident took place.
I think you're going to respond very unfavorably to that characterization by the prosecution because of some of those facts that have come out. And when I heard and saw this coverage of the Diddy thing, I thought that there would be this mountain of victims who had been forcibly coerced into things they didn't want to do. And now what it looks like is that he's definitely guilty of domestic violence, which is terrible. He hasn't been charged with domestic violence, which is interesting. If he were charged with that, I think he would be convicted. But that's a state matter, and this is a federal prosecution. And so what they're having to prove, they have precisely one victim. One, Cassie Ventura. And that victim is in text messages saying she hopes the next freak off isn't the last freak off, but the first freak off for the rest of their lives. And, you know, if Cassie regretted those, that's awful, but it's at least a mixed message. If while she's regretting it, she's making those statements. And there, I guess, could be two reasons that she had participation in these events. One, that she was forcibly, violently coerced or extorted. And the other, she didn't want to lose her man. And she did things she didn't want to do because she didn't want to lose her man. Now, one of those is probably sex trafficking and a crime. And the other one definitely isn't. And this fact pattern seems to meld the two pretty substantially. I'll give you the last word on it.
I think in the days after the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial and you know, especially in the days after Me Too and all this stuff, and there's a lot of let's say believe all women isn't the standard anymore. I think that's being applied here too.
Yeah, all we have to do is believe her own text messages.
Well, then
where she's consenting to the conduct.
Well, but if she goes on the stand and says something different, now what do you believe, right? And so I think that this mixed.
Well, what was Diddy supposed to believe?
And by the way, is he allowed to believe something that is not criminal? Like, oh, I think she is totally into it. If that's what she's saying, right?
I'm not saying he's a good guy. I think he should definitely be convicted of the crimes that he obviously committed, but those seem to be state crimes around assault, battery, domestic violence. It does not seem to be a federal sex trafficking case.
Whatever this is, it's not it. So I think he gets off on this and then maybe goes to state and gets did there for DV or something.
Bishbora, it is always a pleasure to chop it up with you, man. Thanks for hanging out with me on Anchorman, and make sure to leave us a 5-star rating, a review, and always make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on so you get every episode of Anchorman. Make sure to tune into the Matt Gaetz Show. We're on every weeknight, 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 Pacific, only on One America News.
Want to see more great videos like this? Click on the link below to subscribe to OAN Live and watch Dan Ball's Real America and the Matt Gaetz Show on Dish Channel 212. Tune in, subscribe, and watch today.